Welcome to Stone Hearts Club. Let's get started. You know how a crack in glass starts small, barely noticeable, but under pressure, it spreads until everything shatters. Relationships can be the same. We've been married 15 years. No kids by choice. We were both the ambitious type. Rebecca, with her high-profile marketing job, always had her eye on the next big client, the next promotion. Me? I run a custom carpentry business in Sioux Falls. I guess you could say we balanced each other out. She chased the spotlight. I was content working with my hands, building things that'd last longer than the latest trend. Lately, though, Rebecca had been different. Not bad exactly, just distant. More time at work, fewer evenings spent on the couch together, fewer of those little inside jokes that used to make us laugh like teenagers. She'd always been busy, but this was a new level. Nights out with the team became a regular thing, and I told myself it was fine. Everyone deserves a career they're proud of, right? Still, there were signs. Small ones at first. One evening, she came home wearing an expensive perfume I didn't recognize. When I asked about it, she laughed it off, said a coworker had spilled her bottle in the office and shared some with everyone to diffuse the smell. It sounded ridiculous, but I didn't push. Why would I? Rebecca's never given me a reason to doubt her. Then there was her phone. She was always good about keeping it face up on the kitchen counter or nightstand. Lately, though, it was glued to her hand, or flipped over when she set it down. I told myself she was just being protective about work stuff. Some of her clients were high profile, and she'd mentioned confidentiality before. It made sense. I didn't want to be that guy, snooping or prying. But there was one night that stuck with me. It was late, around 11 p.m., and I was lying in bed while Rebecca was downstairs finishing an email, or so she said. I rolled over and saw her phone light up on the nightstand. Just one name, John. John? I didn't know a John. When she came upstairs, I asked her, half joking. Who's John? She froze for just a fraction of a second. Not long enough for most people to notice, but I did. Then she laughed too loud and said, Oh, he's just a guy from work. One of the senior partners. He's helping me with the new campaign. Something about the way she said it didn't sit right, but I let it go. What else could I do? Weeks passed, and things didn't improve. If anything, Rebecca seemed more distracted, more absent. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. The house we'd built together, a cozy 2-story place just outside Sioux Falls, with a big deck out back and a garage where I kept my tools, felt emptier than ever. I threw myself into work to keep my mind off it. Orders were steady, and I had a few big projects lined up. One of them was for Rebecca's best friend, Jenna, who wanted a custom dining table for her new townhouse. Jenna had been part of our lives forever, almost like a sister to Rebecca. She'd just gone through a messy divorce, and Rebecca insisted I cut her a deal. Jenna was around more often lately, usually to talk to Rebecca, but sometimes just to hang out. She'd bring over a bottle of wine, and the three of us would sit in the living room like old times, laughing and reminiscing. Except, these days, Rebecca didn't laugh as much. She'd excuse herself to take a call or send an email, leaving Jenna and me to finish the bottle. You okay? Jenna asked one night after Rebecca had disappeared upstairs. You seem off. I shrugged. Just work stuff. Busy season. She didn't look convinced. Well, if you ever need to talk, you know where to find me. It was a kind offer, but I couldn't take her up on it. Not about this. Not when I wasn't even sure what this was. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Rebecca was turned away from me, her breathing slow and steady. I reached out to touch her shoulder but stopped myself. She felt a million miles away, even though she was right there. I closed my eyes and told myself I was imagining things. That I was being paranoid. That Rebecca and I had been through too much together for something to come between us now. But that nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. It whispered that the monster in the closet was real. The following weekend, Rebecca had another work dinner. She breezed out of the house in a black dress I hadn't seen in years, looking stunning, like the version of her I'd fallen in love with back in college. She barely kissed me goodbye before rushing out the door, leaving behind a swirl of perfume and unanswered questions. "Don't wait up," she'd said with a smile. I didn't wait up. Instead, I poured myself a whiskey and sat out on the deck, staring into the darkness of the backyard. Our place backed up to a patch of woods that was peaceful during the day but felt eerie at night. I used to love sitting out here with Rebecca, planning future trips we'd never take, or arguing about whether to get a dog. Now, it was just me and the crickets. The next morning, I woke up to find her already gone. A note on the kitchen counter said she'd gone to the office to catch up on work. I wanted to believe her. I really did. By the time Sunday rolled around, I was so on edge that when Jenna texted me about the table I was building for her, I invited her over just to have someone to talk to. She showed up with a Starbucks cup in one hand and a bag of pastries in the other, her blonde hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. "Thought you might need a pick-me-up," she said, handing me the coffee. "Thanks," I said, taking it with a weak smile. We sat on the back deck, the mid-morning sun warming the cool South Dakota air. Jenna was easy to talk to. Always had been. She asked me about the table, about work, and eventually, about Rebecca. "She's been working a lot, huh?" Jenna said, brushing a crumb off her lap. "Yeah. Non-stop, it feels like." Jenna hesitated, then said, "You two okay?" I opened my mouth to say, "Of course," but the words didn't come out. Instead, I shrugged and took a sip of coffee. "Has she said anything to you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "About us?" Jenna looked uncomfortable. She set her cup down and crossed her arms. "Not really. I mean, she talks about work a lot. How stressful it's been. But that's all." I wanted to believe her. Jenna was Rebecca's best friend. If something was wrong, wouldn't she know? Wouldn't Rebecca have confided in her? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. That evening, Rebecca came home looking exhausted but cheerful. She kissed me on the cheek and asked about my day, like everything was perfectly normal. "How was your dinner?" I asked, watching her closely. "Oh, fine," she said, kicking off her heels. "John was in rare form, as usual. He's such a character." There it was again. "John. Is he your boss or something?" I asked, trying to sound indifferent. She paused, then nodded. "Yeah, kind of. He's one of the senior partners." "Why?" "Just curious," I said, pretending to focus on the TV. Rebecca didn't seem to notice my tone, but I caught the faintest flicker of discomfort in her eyes before she turned away. Over the next week, I started paying more attention. To Rebecca, to her schedule, to the little details I'd overlooked before. I wasn't trying to catch her in anything, I told myself that repeatedly. I just wanted to understand. To prove to myself that I was imagining things. But the more I watched, the more I noticed things that didn't add up. Like the way she'd leave the room to answer certain calls. Or how she suddenly started working out in the evenings, even though she'd always said she hated exercising after a long day. And then there was her wardrobe. New clothes, more polished and professional than usual. I even found a receipt for a hotel bar downtown. 2 drinks, not 1. When I showed it to her, she laughed it off. "That was from a client meeting," she said. "John was there. I told you, he's helping me with the campaign." I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy. But I couldn't shake the image of her sitting in that bar with someone else, laughing, leaning in close. One night, about 2 weeks later, things came to a head. Rebecca was working late again, so I decided to do something I'd been avoiding for weeks, call Jenna. "Hey," she said when she picked up. "Everything okay? Can you come over?" I asked. There was a pause. "Sure. Be there in 20. When Jenna arrived, I didn't waste time with small talk. I told her everything, about the late nights, the phone calls, the hotel receipt. I didn't expect her to have answers, but I needed someone to hear me out. Someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. Jenna listened quietly, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, she sighed and leaned back in her chair. I don't know, Dan, she said. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but that doesn't sound great. No, I said bitterly. It doesn't. For a long moment, we sat there in silence. Then Jenna said something that stopped me cold. Do you think she's seeing someone? The words hung in the air like smoke, choking me. I wanted to say no. I wanted to defend Rebecca, to explain everything away. But I couldn't. Because deep down, I was starting to believe it was true. I didn't sleep that night. Jenna's question played on a loop in my head, over and over. Do you think she's seeing someone? The words felt like a splinter under my skin, impossible to ignore. Rebecca came home late, as usual. I pretended to be asleep when she slipped into bed, her hair smelling faintly of that expensive perfume. She didn't kiss me goodnight, or even say anything. Just climbed in, turned her back to me, and fell asleep like nothing was wrong. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my fists clenched under the blanket. The next morning, Rebecca left early for a client breakfast. I stayed home from work, telling myself I needed a day to clear my head. Instead, I spent the morning pacing around the house, replaying every interaction with Rebecca from the past year, looking for clues. Eventually, I found myself in the garage, staring at my workbench. My tools were scattered across it, half-finished projects sitting idle. Normally, this was my sanctuary, the one place where my mind quieted. But today, not even the scent of sawdust could calm me. I picked up my phone and dialed Jenna. Dan? She answered, sounding surprised. What's up? I need your help, I said. With what? I hesitated. I want to know where Rebecca's really going tonight. There was a long pause. Then Jenna said, You're serious about this? Yeah, I said quietly. I have to know. That evening, I told Rebecca I was working late on a big order. She barely glanced up from her phone, just murmured, Okay, see you later. I left the house around 6 p.m. and drove to Jenna's place. She was waiting on the porch, her arms crossed against the cool evening air. You sure about this? She asked as I pulled up. I nodded. I need to know the truth. We took Jenna's car, a nondescript sedan she insisted was better for blending in. She drove while I sat in the passenger seat, my heart pounding as we tailed Rebecca's car through the streets of Sioux Falls. Rebecca drove downtown, pulling into the parking lot of a sleek, upscale restaurant. She said she had a late meeting with clients. I muttered. Jenna didn't say anything. She parked a few spots away, and we sat in silence, watching as Rebecca got out of her car. She was dressed to the nines, heels, a fitted dress, the works. My chest tightened as I watched her walk into the restaurant like she didn't have a care in the world. Minutes passed. Then, a man walked in after her. He was tall, sharply dressed, with salt and pepper hair. He had a confident stride, like he owned the place. Is that him? Jenna asked. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The man held the door open for Rebecca, and they disappeared inside. We waited outside for over an hour, Jenna trying to make small talk while I stared at the restaurant, my fists clenched. I felt like a volcano, ready to erupt at any second. When Rebecca and the man finally came out, they were laughing. She touched his arm as they walked to the parking lot, her smile so genuine it made my stomach turn. Dan, Jenna said cautiously. I didn't answer. I was already opening the door. Dan, wait! Jenna hissed, grabbing my arm. What are you gonna do? March over there and make a scene? I froze, my hand on the door handle. She was right. Charging in now wouldn't accomplish anything. But the anger bubbling inside me wouldn't go away. We're following him, I said through gritted teeth. Jenna didn't argue. She started the car and followed the man's sleek black Mercedes as he left the parking lot. He drove to a nearby hotel, a fancy one, the kind with valet parking and a doorman. Rebecca's car pulled in right behind him. We sat in silence, watching as Rebecca and the man disappeared into the hotel. My mind was racing, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. "This doesn't look good," Jenna said quietly. "No," I said. "It doesn't." I wanted to storm into the hotel, to confront them, to demand answers. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not without knowing the whole truth. "We'll wait," I said. "For how long?" Jenna asked. "As long as it takes," I said. Hours passed. Jenna tried to keep the mood light, cracking jokes and talking about her own messy divorce. But I could barely focus on what she was saying. My mind was stuck on Rebecca, on the man, on what they might be doing right now. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Rebecca emerged from the hotel. She looked different. Disheveled. Her hair was slightly messy, her lipstick smudged. She walked quickly to her car, glancing around like she was worried someone might see her. The man followed a few minutes later, looking just as composed as he had when he arrived. I didn't need any more proof. Jenna drove me home in silence. She kept glancing at me, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. I sat stiffly in the passenger seat, staring out the window, my hands clenched into fists. My mind felt like it was on fire, racing with 100 different thoughts and emotions. Anger, sadness, disbelief, all of them swirling together into something I couldn't untangle. When we pulled into my driveway, Jenna finally spoke. "Dan, listen," she said cautiously. "Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe it's not what it looks like." I turned to her, my jaw tight. "It's exactly what it looks like." She didn't argue. Instead, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm here if you need me." I nodded stiffly, then got out of the car without another word. That night, Rebecca came home late, as usual. I was sitting on the couch in the dark, nursing a glass of whiskey. She didn't notice me at first, just slipped off her heels and set her bag on the counter like nothing was wrong. "Late night?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She jumped, startled. "Oh. Dan, you scared me." She forced a smile. "Yeah, it was a long meeting. The client had a lot of questions." I stared at her, my chest tight. She was lying to my face, and I couldn't decide if I wanted to scream at her or burst into tears. "Sounds exhausting," I said, keeping my tone even. She nodded, then walked over and kissed the top of my head. "I'm going to bed. Don't stay up too late." I watched her disappear down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in my ears. The next day, I couldn't focus on work. I spent most of the morning pacing around the shop, my thoughts stuck on Rebecca and that man, John, as she'd called him. Every time I pictured them together, my blood boiled. Around noon, I gave up on pretending to be productive and called Jenna. "Can you come over?" I asked. "Sure," she said. "What's going on?" I need to talk to someone." Jenna arrived an hour later with a bottle of wine in hand. We sat on the back deck, the South Dakota sun beating down on us. She poured us both a glass, and we drank in silence for a while before I finally spoke. "I can't believe this is happening," I said, my voice trembling. "I thought we were happy. I thought we were solid." Jenna sighed. "I don't know what to tell you, Dan. Sometimes people change. Sometimes they make bad choices." "Yeah, well, she's making a hell of a bad choice." Jenna didn't respond right away. She just sipped her wine and stared out at the trees. Finally, she said, "What are you going to do?" I shook my head. "I don't know. I can't just confront her, not without proof. She'll deny everything." Jenna looked at me for a long moment, then said, "What if I helped you?" "Help me how?" "We could. I don't know, dig deeper. Find something concrete. That way, when you confront her, she can't weasel her way out of it." I hesitated. It felt wrong, sneaky, but I couldn't deny the logic. If I wanted the truth, I had to be willing to do whatever it took to find it. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's do it." Over the next few days, Jenna and I worked together to gather evidence. She helped me install a GPS tracker on Rebecca's car and showed me how to recover deleted messages from her phone. It felt dirty, like I was violating her privacy, but I told myself it was justified. The first real breakthrough came a week later. I was going through Rebecca's phone while she was in the shower when I found a string of texts from John. John, can't stop thinking about last night. You're amazing. Rebecca, you're not so bad yourself, winky face. My stomach turned as I scrolled through the messages. They were flirty, intimate, and completely damning. I snapped pictures of the texts with my own phone, my hands shaking. When Rebecca came out of the bathroom, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding. Everything okay? She asked, toweling off her hair. Yeah, I said quickly, slipping my phone into my pocket. Just thinking about work. She smiled, oblivious, and kissed my cheek. Don't stress too much, okay? You work too hard. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside I felt like I was going to explode. That night, I called Jenna and told her what I'd found. Wow, she said, her voice heavy. So it's real. Yeah, I said, my throat tight. It's real. Dan. She paused, then said, What are you going to do? I didn't answer right away. I didn't know the answer. Part of me wanted to confront Rebecca right then and there, to shove the evidence in her face and demand an explanation. But another part of me wanted revenge. I don't know, I said finally. But I'm not letting her get away with this. Jenna didn't respond, but I could hear the hesitation in her silence. Finally, she said, Whatever you decide, I'm here for you. Thanks, I said. But even as I said it, I couldn't help wondering what revenge might look like, and how far I was willing to go. The next few days felt surreal, like I was walking through someone else's life. I had the proof I needed, but I still couldn't bring myself to confront Rebecca. Instead, I went through the motions, work, dinner, small talk, while a storm brewed inside me. Rebecca acted like everything was fine, which only made it worse. She'd kiss me goodbye in the mornings, ask about my day in the evenings, and fall asleep next to me like she hadn't betrayed everything we'd built together. It was maddening. Meanwhile, Jenna and I kept in touch. She checked in often, offering a sounding board for my frustrations. She was kind, understanding, and, most importantly, she didn't push. She let me vent without judgment, which was more than I could say for anyone else in my life. One evening, after a particularly rough day, I found myself texting her. Me. You free tonight? Jenna. Yeah. Want me to come over? Me. Please. She showed up half an hour later with another bottle of wine. We sat on the couch, talking about everything and nothing. She didn't bring up Rebecca, and I was grateful for the distraction. But as the night wore on, the wine loosened my tongue and my guard. I don't know what to do, I admitted, staring into my glass. I can't just pretend everything's okay. But I don't know if I'm ready to end it either. Jenna hesitated, then said softly, You don't have to decide right now. Take your time. Figure out what you want. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in weeks. She was beautiful in a quiet, understated way, blonde hair, soft blue eyes, a warm smile that had always felt genuine. I'd never thought of her as anything more than Rebecca's friend, but in that moment, something shifted. Thanks for being here, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Of course, she said, her eyes meeting mine. The silence stretched between us, heavy and charged. Neither of us moved, but the air between us seemed to hum with unspoken tension. Jenna, I began, but I didn't know how to finish the sentence. She leaned in slightly, her gaze flicking to my lips. Dan, Before I could think better of it, I closed the distance between us. The kiss was tentative at first, almost shy, but it deepened quickly. All the anger, frustration, and hurt I'd been carrying seemed to pour out in that moment, channeled into something raw and primal. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Dan, Jenna said, her voice shaking. Are you sure about this? I hesitated, the weight of the situation crashing down on me. But then I thought of Rebecca, of her lies, of the text I'd read on her phone. Yeah, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm sure. The next morning, I woke up in bed next to Jenna. She was still asleep, her blonde hair spilling across the pillow. For a moment I felt a pang of guilt, but then I remembered why I'd done it. Rebecca had betrayed me first. She'd broken our vows, not me. This was just balancing the scales. Jenna stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Morning, she said softly. Morning, I replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. So, what now? I sighed. I don't know. I need to figure things out. She nodded, her expression unreadable. Just be careful, okay? This is messy enough as it is. I know, I said. After Jenna left, I sat on the couch, staring at the wall. I didn't regret what had happened between us, not exactly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed a line. Still, a part of me felt vindicated. Rebecca wasn't the only one who could play dirty. That evening, Rebecca came home looking tired but cheerful. She kissed me on the cheek and asked about my day, completely unaware of what had happened while she was at work. Long day? I asked, watching her carefully. Yeah, but productive, she said, kicking off her heels. We're finally making progress on the campaign. Sounds like John's really been helping you out, I said, my voice casual. She froze for just a fraction of a second before forcing a smile. Yeah, he's been great. Why? No reason, I said, turning back to the TV. Rebecca didn't push the conversation, but I could feel her watching me, like she was trying to gauge how much I knew. Over the next week, things between Rebecca and me remained tense but polite. Neither of us brought up the growing distance between us, but it was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Jenna and I continued to see each other, though we kept things quiet. It wasn't about love, or even lust really. It was about connection. About finding comfort in the only person who seemed to understand what I was going through. But the more time I spent with Jenna, the more complicated things became. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. It didn't take long for the cracks to widen. Rebecca's late nights at work continued, and while she seemed blissfully unaware of what I'd discovered, her behavior became more erratic. She was jumpier than usual, her laughter a little too forced, her excuses less convincing. I didn't know if she suspected anything about Jenna and me, but the weight of her own guilt seemed to be taking its toll. One evening, she came home earlier than expected. I was in the garage, sanding down a table for a client, when I heard her heels clicking on the driveway. She poked her head in, a smile plastered across her face. Hey, she said brightly. What are you working on? Just a table, I said without looking up. She walked over and ran her fingers along the edge of the wood. It's beautiful. Who's it for? Jenna, I said evenly. Her hand froze mid-stroke. Oh, that's nice of you. Yeah, well, she's been around a lot lately, I said, setting the sander down. Figured I'd do her a favor. Rebecca didn't respond. Her smile wavered for a moment before she forced it back into place. Well, I'm going to start dinner, she said, backing toward the door. Come in when you're done. I watched her go, a bitter taste rising in my throat. I could feel the tension between us, the unspoken truths hanging in the air like a storm cloud. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while Rebecca snored softly beside me. My mind was racing, torn between anger, guilt, and something else I couldn't quite name. Around 2 a.m., I got up and went downstairs. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat in the dark, my thoughts swirling. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Jenna. Jenna. Can't sleep. You okay? Me. Not really. Want to come over? She didn't respond right away, but 15 minutes later, I heard a knock at the back door. Jenna slipped inside, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was wearing an old hoodie and yoga pants, but she still managed to look beautiful. Hey, she said softly. Hey. I replied, gesturing for her to sit. We sat on the couch, sipping whiskey in silence. Jenna didn't push me to talk, which I appreciated. She just sat there, her presence a quiet comfort. Eventually, I broke the silence. I don't know how much longer I can do this, I said, my voice cracking. Jenna reached over and took my hand. Then don't, she said simply. I looked at her, my chest tightening. It's not that easy. We've been together 15 years. We built a life together. How do you just walk away from that? She hesitated, then said, Sometimes the life you built isn't the one you're meant to live. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't want to admit it, but she was right. The life Rebecca and I had built was a house of cards, and it was only a matter of time before it collapsed. The next morning, Rebecca was unusually affectionate. She kissed me on the cheek as I made coffee, humming a tune under her breath. It was so out of character that I almost laughed. What's got you in such a good mood? I asked. Can't a wife just be happy to see her husband? She said with a wink. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched her carefully, wondering if this was her way of easing her guilt, or if she was trying to distract me from something. As the day went on, my suspicion grew. Rebecca's behavior was too calculated, too deliberate. She kept glancing at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, her smile faltering whenever a message came through. By the time she left for work, I was convinced something was up. That evening I called Jenna. I think something's going on, I said. What do you mean? Rebecca. She's acting weird. Like she's trying too hard to be normal. Jenna sighed. Dan, you already know she's seeing someone. What more do you need? I don't know, I admitted. But I can't shake the feeling that there's more to it. Well, what do you want to do? I hesitated. I want to follow her again. Jenna picked me up around 8 p.m., and we parked a block away from Rebecca's office. Her car was still in the lot, but the building looked dark. She's still there? Jenna asked, squinting through the windshield. Looks like it, I said. We waited for over an hour, watching as the lot slowly emptied. Finally, around 9:30, Rebecca came out, her heels clicking on the pavement. She wasn't alone. John was with her, his hand resting casually on her lower back as they walked to his car. Unbelievable, I muttered, gripping the edge of my seat. Dan, Jenna said cautiously, don't do anything stupid. I didn't answer. My blood was boiling, my hands shaking. I wanted to storm over there, to grab John by the collar and demand an explanation. But I knew it wouldn't accomplish anything. Instead, I watched as they got into his car and drove off. Where do you think they're going? Jenna asked as we followed at a safe distance. Only one way to find out, I said. We tailed them to another hotel, the same one as before. This time, I didn't wait. I got out of the car and marched toward the entrance, my heart pounding. Dan! Jenna called after me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The lobby of the hotel was sleek and modern, with polished marble floors and a chandelier that glinted like starlight overhead. It felt surreal to stand there, knowing Rebecca and John were somewhere in this building, oblivious to the storm about to crash down on them. The woman at the front desk looked up as I approached, her professional smile faltering slightly when she saw my expression. Can I help you, sir? She asked. Yes, I said, my voice tight. I need to know if my wife checked in here tonight. I'm sorry, but we can't release that kind of information, she said, her tone polite but firm. Look, I know she's here, I snapped. Her name's Rebecca Green. She's with a man named John. The woman's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked her reaction. Sir, I'm afraid I can't. Don't bother, I said, cutting her off. I turned and headed toward the elevators. Sir, you can't go up there without a key card, she called after me, but I didn't stop. The elevators were guarded by a panel that required a key card to operate, just as she'd warned. Frustrated, I turned back toward the desk, ready to demand answers, when Jenna appeared at my side. Dan, she said, grabbing my arm. Think this through. You don't want to get yourself arrested. I don't care, I said, shaking her off. I need to see her. She looked at me for a long moment, her blue eyes filled with something between sympathy and worry. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. What are you doing? I asked. Being resourceful, she said with a wry smile. To my astonishment, she produced a hotel key card. Jenna, I began. How the hell did you? Long story, she said, cutting me off. Come on. Let's find them. We rode the elevator in silence, the tension between us so thick it was almost suffocating. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding as we ascended to the upper floors. Jenna studied the numbers on the keycard. Suite 817, she said softly. When the elevator doors opened, we stepped into a quiet hallway lined with doors. Plush carpet muffled our footsteps as we made our way to the suite. I stopped in front of the door, my pulse racing. Dan, Jenna whispered, placing a hand on my arm. Are you sure about this? No, I admitted. But I have to do it. She nodded, then stepped back to give me space. I raised my hand and knocked, each rap on the door echoing down the hall like a gunshot. There was a long, agonizing pause. Then, footsteps approached from inside. The door opened a crack, and Rebecca's face appeared. Her expression went from curious to horrified in an instant. Dan? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, I said, my voice cold. Mind if I come in? She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. I pushed the door open before she could stop me. John was standing near the bed, his tie loosened, his face pale. Ah, I said, stepping into the room. There he is. The infamous John. Dan, wait, Rebecca began, but I held up a hand. Don't, I said sharply. Don't you dare try to explain this away. John cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. I think I'll leave you two to talk. Oh no, I said, turning to him. You're not going anywhere. He froze, his face flushing red. I looked back at Rebecca, my chest tight with anger and hurt. How long? I demanded. She blinked, her eyes filling with tears. Dan, How long? She hesitated, then said softly. A few months. The words hit me like a physical blow. I took a step back, my hands balling into fists. I trusted you, I said, my voice shaking. I defended you. And this is how you repay me? Dan, I didn't mean for this to happen, she said, tears streaming down her face. It got out of control. You didn't mean for it to happen? I said, my voice rising. What the hell does that even mean? You don't just accidentally end up in a hotel room with your boss. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. John shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between us. Look, I think it's best if I... Shut up, I snapped, rounding on him. You don't get to walk away from this like nothing happened. Dan, please, Rebecca said, stepping between us. This isn't his fault. It's mine. No, I said, shaking my head. It's both of you. You're both disgusting. I turned and stormed out of the room, my head spinning. Jenna was waiting in the hallway, her expression unreadable. Dan, she said softly, are you okay? I didn't answer. I just kept walking, the sound of Rebecca's sobs echoing in my ears. Jenna followed me to the elevator, staying silent as we rode down to the lobby. When we stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap in the face. What now? Jenna asked. I didn't know. I didn't have an answer. The drive home was a blur. Jenna didn't speak, and neither did I. The quiet between us was heavy, filled with everything that had just happened and everything we weren't saying. When we pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a moment, staring at the house. It looked the same as it always had, warm, inviting, the lights glowing softly through the windows. But it didn't feel like home anymore. Do you want me to stay? Jenna asked hesitantly. I shook my head. I need to be alone. She nodded, her expression tinged with something like sadness. "Okay. Call me if you need anything." I got out of the car without responding. Jenna waited until I was inside before driving away, her headlights disappearing into the night. The house was eerily quiet. I poured myself a whiskey and sat on the couch, replaying the events of the night over and over in my head. Rebecca had betrayed me. The woman I'd built my life with, the person I thought I knew better than anyone, had been lying to me for months. And yet, as much as I wanted to hate her, I couldn't. Anger, hurt, and betrayal coursed through me, but beneath it all was a deep, aching sadness. I thought about the early days of our relationship, when everything had been so easy, so full of possibility. I thought about the plans we'd made, the dreams we'd shared. Where had it all gone wrong? Rebecca came home just after midnight. I didn't turn around when I heard the door open. She hesitated in the entryway, then slowly walked into the living room. "Dan," she said softly. I didn't respond. She sat down on the couch across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I let out a bitter laugh. "You're sorry? That's what you have to say." "I know I've hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I've broken your trust. But it wasn't about you, Dan. It was never about you." "Then what the hell was it about?" I snapped. She hesitated, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know. I was unhappy. With myself. With my life. I felt like I was drowning, and John, he made me feel alive again." "Alive?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You mean sneaking around behind my back made you feel alive?" She flinched but didn't argue. "I gave you everything, Rebecca," I said, my voice breaking. "I built this life with you. I trusted you. And you threw it all away for what? A fling with your boss." "It wasn't a fling," she said quietly. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, my chest tightening. "You're in love with him," I said flatly. Rebecca didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I don't know." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Unbelievable. The rest of the night passed in a haze. Rebecca tried to explain herself, to justify her actions, but I couldn't hear her over the roar of my own anger and pain. Eventually, I told her to leave. She packed a bag and left without argument, her shoulders slumped in defeat. As the door closed behind her, the silence in the house became deafening. Over the next few days, I tried to make sense of everything. Jenna came by a few times, offering support, but even her presence felt complicated now. What had started as a moment of revenge had turned into something messy, something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Rebecca called a few times, leaving tearful voicemails that I couldn't bring myself to listen to. She wanted to talk too, work things out. But I wasn't sure there was anything left to work out. One evening, about a week after the confrontation at the hotel, I sat on the back deck with Jenna. The sun was setting, casting the woods behind the house in shades of gold and orange. "Do you regret it?" Jenna asked softly. "Regret what?" I said. "Letting Rebecca go?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "What happened between us?" I stared out at the trees, my thoughts a tangled mess. Did I regret it? Part of me wanted to say yes, that it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness. But another part of me, the part that craved connection, that didn't want to feel alone, couldn't bring itself to regret anything. "I don't know," I said finally. Jenna nodded, her expression unreadable. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild. It wasn't easy, nothing about the situation was, but I found small moments of clarity amidst the chaos. I focused on my work, pouring my energy into the carpentry projects that had always brought me a sense of peace. Jenna and I continued to spend time together, though we kept things platonic for now. As for Rebecca, she moved out of the house and into an apartment downtown. We spoke occasionally, mostly about logistics, but the conversations were brief and strained. She said she was seeing a therapist, trying to figure out what had driven her to cheat. I wasn't sure if I believed her, or if it even mattered anymore. Life didn't return to normal, not exactly, but it moved forward. Slowly, painfully, I started to heal. One thing was certain, I would never be the same. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing.